When trying to improve hip mobility, a lot of people are blaming the hip flexor. The hip flexor isn't the problem. There are other issues that lead to the hip flexor being stiff. So by continuously stretching it, it's no wonder why people aren't getting the results that they want. They're not able to get the improvements in the hip mobility that you would expect to happen. So in this video, we're going to talk about why the hip flexor isn't the enemy and what we can do to improve hip mobility where we don't have to constantly stretch one particular muscle. Hi, I'm Alex Effer, founder of Resilient Training Rehab, and I've helped thousands of coaches and trainers get faster and more consistent results with their clients. Let's get into it. So before we get into a couple exercises that are actually going to address the problem, it's important to understand what the issue actually is. Whenever we have tension going through the muscle, it doesn't have to do with the muscle because the muscle reacts. It has more to do with the positioning of that joint. So for example, in the case of the hip flexor, the psoas, it's important to understand that when our center of mass starts to go forwards, as we start to create more stiffness, maybe we're doing repeated exercises, we're doing the same kind of program that requires a lot of force production or a lot of tension, two-legged movements like squats, not a lot of rotation happening, or maybe it's a job, we're sitting for long periods of time. All this is going to start to push our center of gravity forward, which is not a problem until it becomes one. And so we can start to gain stiffness, we can have pain in some circumstances, but really as our center of mass goes towards our toes, what ends up by happening is our pelvis starts dumping forward. Now, if the pelvis starts dumping forward, neurologically, our nervous system understands that's what's happening, and so it recruits more muscles in particular areas that are going to help either produce force or to catch ourselves from falling. The hip flexor is going to be a muscle that's going to be loaded. And so as this pelvis moves forward, the hip starts to become more flexed. And if that hip becomes more flexed, well then of course muscles like our psoas are going to start to be overloaded. Now this doesn't mean that the solution is to stretch the psoas. The solution is to restore the thing that's happening in the first place, and that is position. So tension issue is a position issue. It's not a muscular issue. So what I can have is I've got a pelvis that's going forward. I can also have a pelvis that's going forward and turning away from that side. Okay, so this is somebody who maybe shifts their hip towards one side. So let's just say I'm turning my hips towards the left, and then I turn my hips towards the left, then I get a little bit of a hip hike as well. Well, that's going to create tension through that psoas. And the thing with the psoas is it actually attaches inside of our diaphragm. You can't cut the psoas without cutting into the diaphragm. And so that means that psoas is also going to be impacted by the rib cage position. So if I flare my ribs, for example, then I'm going to create tension through the psoas. So the rib cage is also going to impact that hip flexor tightness, which makes sense why the hip flexor stretch at the hip is not working. So if my rib cage flares, then my pelvis is going to dump forward, and then that's going to put tension on those muscles. Now the psoas also has to do with rotation of the pelvis, right? So I can have rotation towards that pelvis, which is, as I said, why you see these people who have a side bend through their rib cage, their hip is hiked up, and when they squat, maybe they shift towards that side. The psoas is going to pull the spine towards that because it not only connects to the hip, but it goes along the spine. So we now have a psoas that can be impacted by the rib cage, by the pelvis, by our center of mass, and I haven't even talked about what happens inside the body, but that's for another post. But all of these things impact the tension being placed on that one muscle. So stretching that muscle is not solving the issue. It is trying to deal with the symptom. If I have stiff hips, if I look like I'm arching my back or flaring my ribs, well, people are going to say, oh, the front of your hip is going to be stiff, and for sure it will feel stiff, but we need to have a better strategy to overcome this. So to overcome this, we are going to need to shift our center of mass back towards our heels. We need to take the rib cage, we need to bring it back. We need to take our pelvis and we need it to not be so far in front of us, but to be stacked over top of our heels. And one of the mistakes that people make is when I say this, you're probably doing it to yourself. You are saying, okay, I got to go my rib cage back, so they then crunch their ribs. That's not the answer. I say, okay, your pelvis needs to come back. They start to do these posterior pelvic tilts. That's also not the answer, because both of these things are still going to push me towards my toes. Because by doing this posterior pelvic tilt, I'm going to squeeze my glutes, push me towards my toes. That's not the solution. So instead, we're going to be thinking about how we can drive those changes using positions and different muscles so that it looks like we're becoming more of a stacked position versus going from a scissor to a reverse scissor. So our first thing that we're going to do is try to get our center of mass back towards our heels by getting our rib cage back. Again, I'm not saying rib cage back by slouching or really rounding forward. It's more of a shift back as though I'm pushing myself back towards my heels. That's exactly what I'm going to do. By being in this seated position, this is going to naturally unload my pelvis. It's going to relax all the muscles in the back part of the pelvis. By having my feet planted and pushing myself away from the cables, this is naturally going to shift me back even more. By holding on to the cables, what the objective of the cables to do is to pull me forward. And so now I have to lean back against it. So it's separating my shoulder blades and starting to open up my back. If I can open up my back and open up the back part of my hips, then I'm going to start to reduce that tension because I'm going to shift back. So what I'm going to get you to do is just get into this position. And as you can see, my knees are slightly above my hips. That's kind of what I want, because by having the knees slightly above my hips, it's naturally going to tilt the pelvis back a little bit more. I'm then going to get you to have the cables a little bit lower and then let the cables win as they pull your shoulder blades apart. You're then going to take a big breath into your nose without slouching, without getting too tall. Like you're feeling like you are getting taller without flaring your ribs. As you breathe out, you're going to hold this position and let the cables win again. Not slouching. So again, this is addressing the position. It's not addressing the tension of that muscle. We shouldn't feel like we've got pinching in our hips. We shouldn't feel a lot of tension in the hips. We should feel more like a big stretch in our back. Second exercise is going to be on my back. Now, one of the key things with the pelvis tilting back, we need the tag of our pants or our belt line to be in contact with the ground. As you can see, I've got this pad underneath my hips. A lot of times when people have their back against the ground, they got their feet elevated, you can see this arch going through their back. And so when I say, hey, push the tag of your pants into the ground, then what they end up by doing is they end up by crunching excessively. And so what the pad does, it brings the ground up towards them. So what they can do is they can push the tag of their pants in the ground without allowing their stomach muscles contract. If your stomach muscles contract when you do this, you're just crunching too much. That's not what we want. That's very similar to what we were saying before. By having my feet elevated, this is also going to naturally decompress my hips a little bit. If I have my feet on the ground, a lot of times people, again, will start to arch their back, right? So by having your feet elevated, it naturally shifts our weight back again towards our heels. So by being in this position, what I get people to do is press on the inside part of their feet, more specifically their heels. And when they start to do that, they should feel the inside part of their hamstrings working. If you feel your calf working, you're either too far away with your feet or you're pushing too much through your toes. So bring your feet a little bit closer and then press the inside part of your feet. You should feel those inside hamstrings contracting. I don't want you to push too hard where your butt starts to lift up. You should keep the tag of your pants pressed down while you're simultaneously pressing the inside part of your feet. Now, I also want to get the rib cage back. So what I like you to do is grab a dumbbell, and we're going to have it what I would call like nipple level, basically. I don't want you to be too high, but you're just reaching up towards the ceiling. What the dumbbell is going to do is going to try to push me down to the ground. So now I have to reach up against it. And when I reach, I get muscles like my serratus anterior, my obliques to pull my rib cage down into the ground. So now I'm getting it from both ends. I'm getting the inside part of the feet. I'm getting the pelvis in a better position. Now I'm getting the rib cage in a better position. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a big breath in through my nose as I reach the dumbbell up towards the ceiling, not reaching where you feel like your head is lifting, but just allowing your shoulder blades to come around the rib cage. And as you breathe out, you're going to simultaneously press the inside part of your feet and the tag of your pants into the pad. So you're going to breathe in as you reach, breathe out as you press the inside part of your feet. So the third exercise is going to be a squatting variation. This is very similar to the first two exercises in terms of positioning. By holding onto the cables, it's going to pull me towards it, so I've got to shift my weight back. And I'm also going to have my feet on ramps. By having the feet on the ramps, that's going to push me towards my toes again, which now I have to shift back towards my heels. So it's getting the position of that first exercise that we were talking about, as well as the second, but now we're going to make it a little bit more dynamic. So what we're going to do in this position, keeping the weight in your heels, letting the shoulder blades be pulled apart, you're going to take a big breath in through your nose. As you breathe out, you're going to go down by pushing your knees forward and having your hips go straight down. You're then going to go to the bottom position, take a big breath in, breathe out, come up. Now when you come up, don't straighten your legs because that's going to squeeze your glutes and push everything forward. You're going to keep your knees nice and bent, and you're going to breathe out as you move. Breathe in, hold the bottom position. Breathe out as you come up. You should feel a lot of inside quads, some glutes. If you don't feel glutes, if you're weight too much in towards your toes, then you can just lighten the load. You can bring the cables up a little bit higher so they're not pulling you down so much and resisting. And you could also just have your heels on the ramp initially and then work your way back to a full foot. So as you can see in this video, hip flexor tightness is not actually a hip flexor issue. People constantly will stretch their hip flexors and not get results, and this is one of the reasons why it's not happening. It's not a muscle problem, it is a position problem. By restoring the position of the rib cage and of the pelvis, we can start to reduce tension in those areas. If you want a program with a bunch of exercises that solves this problem, then check out my Resilient Posture program. I have over 500 people who are already using it with themselves and with their clients and getting really good results. But until then, thank you so much for listening. If you found this helpful, don't forget to like, save, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.